Just chased down the mailman because he left a delivery notification slip in my mailbox, even though I was home. But he had this box, and it was so light that he thought it was empty. And he asked if I wanted to refuse delivery on it, assuming it was a scam package. It is extremely light, and it does feel awfully sus. I put it on the scale, and it's like 3 pounds total, which is very little for a box and a guitar. But I accepted it, and now we're gonna open it. Okay, here we have it. Charming Italian guitar from the early 20th century, presumably. It looks like it's got a fairly standard heel, a rounded neck profile, a rosewood fingerboard that's got a weird chip out of it. My daughter did my nails last night. The tuners, not original. You can see there's some extra length to those holes. That's too bad. And they also jut above and below the actual headstock thickness. The soundboard looks pretty good. No cracks in the soundboard. However, there's some ugliness in the rosette and the purfling. And the bridge, of course, look at this. Somebody's held it together with thread using their seamstress skills. It does have a big crack along its length, and I will probably rebuild that out of ebony. Let's move on to the sides. Sides are quarter sawn Brazilian Rosewood. They're fantastic. 0 cracks. Never had an end pin. The back, same. It's probably the same tree, probably the same cut of wood, but it does have some cracks you can see there. They're pretty tight. I might be able to fix those with just some glue, maybe. Might need a spline on this wider crack here, but we shall see. In the meantime, the bridge, you can tell, is actually coming off, but I'm gonna tune it up and see if I can play it and see if the bridge flies off like it did in my gourd banjo video. All right, let's have a closer look. Things are looking pretty nice. It's a very attractive guitar. Nice appointments overall. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be any indication of who made it or where. So if anyone has any clues as to that, please let me know in the comments. It'd be much appreciated. This may be one of the easiest bridge removals I've ever done. Some people don't realize that often the only thing holding the bridge on once it's this loose is the pins and the strings. I shouldn't have done that. That was pretty rude. I will glue that back together and preserve it for the future owner if they want it. But I'm going to replace it with ebony. I use a dull set of nippers to pull out the bridge pins. This actually used to be my only set, and I would use these to pull frets and to trim frets, and luckily I got a much nicer pair from a friend. anytime I need some cardstock, I just reach into my vintage bass player magazine and grab one of these business reply, etc., yada yada. I don't know English. There we go. What did I say? It would be easy, and easy it was. Interestingly, they seem to have stippled the surface to add more surface area and glue traction. Usually you'll see a toothed plane used for this sort of thing. It's neat. I've never worked on an Italian guitar before this one, so this is new to me. Doesn't really seem to have worked. There's no glue in the stipples. Alright, to work on these cracks, first I'm going to try to re-humidify the guitar, and the humidity will hopefully close these cracks up, but first we need to get any impediments or dust out from between the cracks in hopes they will close. I put a damp rag in there, making sure it does not touch the guitar. And I say goodbye and leave it in the dungeon. I considered continuing the new bridge up into the pickguard like this and having it be a continuous design, but after drawing for a little while, I decided to go for more of a standard Moustache bridge with ball ends. I did this before on this 1860 German guitar, and I thought it turned out quite lovely, even though it's facing the other direction. I also replaced the fretboard on that guitar with a 6.5mm thick ebony board with Evo gold frets. Let me know if you think that's sacrilegious or not on an antique guitar. It really allowed for greater playability, and I didn't have to do a neck reset. Alright, I'm drawing the new design on sticker paper so I can then stick it directly to the ebony for when I want to cut out the new bridge. You can see the footprint of the old bridge is oversized because it had been glued in multiple locations. So I'm not going to make it any bulkier because it's already looking pretty hefty, if I do say so myself. Kind of a dead ringer for Arnold. It will overlap the pickguard, but I'm into it. I'm keeping my saw lines a little proud because there will be some chip out. One more thing to check. Yep, looks great. I'm going to fill the small chips with ebony and super glue. They may be sanded out when I shape it, but better to do it now than after I'm satisfied with the shaping, and don't want to add super glue to a finished product. Most of the super glue will evaporate, so you can be pretty generous with it. Laying out the bridge pins, they are 60mm apart, which is convenient. That means 12mm up between each pinhole. Mark them with an awl. That makes sure that you will get perfectly lined up holes when you drill. See? Trust me, it's perfect. Shinto rasp. I used a variety of knives, files, sandpaper, and other implements to shape the bridge. It's coming along nicely. I'm going to add a couple of dots to each of these balls. There we go. Nice. And I glue those in proud because they are going to be domed in continuation with the dome of the balls. I'm just calling them balls. I don't know what else to call the ends of a stupid ass twisty mustache. This bridge took me an entire day to make. Should I be more efficient? Probably, but I guess I'm not. I was just winging the design, so I started with the treble side, and once I was satisfied with that, I copied the design onto the bass side. Very satisfying, but very time-consuming. Let's check on our cracks. Unfortunately, I'm not really seeing any impact from the humidification, so I will just fix them as is. But first I'm going to start with this seam separation on the upper bass side shoulder. Some people say it's kind of futile to glue something that requires so much pressure because the old saying is that wood has a memory, but I say to them, this guitar used to be a tree, and it didn't bounce back into the shape of a tree yet, so it should be somewhat amenable to this new adjustment. I highly recommend picking up a length of surgical tubing. Extremely useful way to clamp and non-invasive. I see some people work glue into cracks with a suction cup, but that's not possible on the edge like this, nor do I own a suction cup. It came together pretty nicely. It's not perfect, but once it's cleaned up, you'll never think twice about it again. See?
The humidification doesn't really seem to be doing anything for these cracks in the rosewood back. Some of them are way too tight for a spline, so I am going to fill them with glue and rosewood powder. And the biggest crack, we shall have to see. It may require a spline, which will be fun.
I'm going to go sequentially from the tightest cracks to the widest cracks. These ultra tight hairline cracks probably aren't of any threat anymore, but since they're there, we might as well shove as much glue in as we can. Just using tight bond wood glue, obviously. The center seam has a little bit of a gap, but it's more of a buckling gap, so I am going to give it significant downward pressure while the glue dries, and it should end up pretty nice and tight. This crack is going to get a couple of clamps. They're put on quite lightly because otherwise you could push through the top and the back. chamfered the pinholes with a countersink bit. I really love doing this because it means you don't need to necessarily cut a channel into the bridge for the string path. They can just ride along the chamfer instead. The guitar is not ready for the bridge. It's going to need its previous pinholes plugged, and I'm going to add a bridge plate. This guitar had no bridge plate to begin with. Here I'm marking the center, and I put 2 lines to either side of the center line so that I can line it up perfectly when I'm gluing it in place. I plugged all the pinholes with maple. Now I'm going to get my hot hide glue ready for the bridge reglue. This is my glue pot. It's very simple, very cheap to make. Anyone can do it. Look, there's like some recycled juice cans, a glass jar, a candy thermometer or meat thermometer, whatever that is, and some insulation, a 40-watt light bulb, and a dimmer switch. So you can use the dimmer to adjust the temperature. I've heard that 140 degrees is ideal, so I've got it marked for 150, and that dash to the left is 140. Hole in the bottom's just so I can know if it's on or off. I'm actually planning on adding a jewel light because sometimes I forget the glue pot's on and I leave it on. Ta-da! I've always wanted to be a Barker's beauty. Watch my skills. Ta-da! Ooh. $1, Bob. I'm not measuring, not weighing. Put some glue in, put some water in. This is probably enough glue for a couple of weeks. Honestly, like I'll use just a fraction of this for the bridge, and then most of it's gonna go back into the fridge. Let's tackle these 3 larger cracks now. I'm gonna use a combination of dust and glue, and then dust and glue and a few different applications until the crack is mostly level with the rest of the back. And what about this chip out on the fretboard? I think I'll use the same technique, some rosewood dust and cyanoacrylate or super glue. Keep adding it until it's proud of the hole, and then you can work on leveling it back down. There's the maple plugs. Not beautiful, but hopefully you'll never see them again. I epoxied them in place so that they won't come out in the instance that someone needs to heat up the bridge to remove it in the future. Ew. I cleaned up the frets with some 2500 grit sanding cloth and added some of my board butter. It wasn't a thorough job, but it was a decent enough job. Looks pretty sexy. Now the rosette is pretty messed up, and there is no soundboard behind the inner rosette. It's not backed with anything, it's just free floating. And my hand doesn't fit in the hole, and I can't get in to do repairs, so I made a rather rash decision. If I saw somebody else do this, I would probably be furious, but here I am doing it, and I pulled out the loose portion and carved out the rest. I saved all of this. I don't know if anyone's gonna want it, but the end result is pretty handsome in my opinion, and speaking of hands, I can fully fist this comfortably. The new bridge weighs 20.57 grams. The old bridge was about 11 grams. So I am adding approximately 10 grams to the guitar. Don't kill me. I decided to use the old stippling technique. And the glue's almost ready. Just needs to cook a little longer. Oh, this is a dry run. You always have to do a dry run and have your clamps ready because hot hide glue gels very quickly. I almost never videotape when I'm gluing because it's so stressful, and having the camera on just adds extra stress. And I hate it, but I did it this time, and it was a f***ing disaster. In the end, it turned out fine though. Now we need to fit these pins. After I get about this close, I start using the pin reamer with just my hand, not putting any downward pressure, just cleaning it slowly because you don't want it loose. There they are, lovely, sitting in their little chamfers. We're gonna add some cleats of rosewood to the cracks. Nice. Now, because I'm working on intonation, I had to put a couple strings on and play it. Before I get the strings in the way, I'm going to replace this one missing piece of inlay. It's mother of pearl, sort of a four-leaf clover type of situation. The originals are far from perfect, which is great because that means I don't have to work too hard. I'll work a little harder than that though. Here it is. Yeah, I think that's a dead ringer. Just need to thin it out a little bit before gluing it in place. It's gonna look good. And the original was set in mastic, but I don't even know what mastic is, and I don't have any. So I'm gonna use the same technique as always. Some dust and super glue. And I guess it's time to play around some more. All right, let's get the rest of the strings on. Oops.
I prematurely started stringing it up out of excitement without realizing I have yet to apply a saddle to this bridge. But I'm not that stupid, because the more strings I put on, the more strings I can check the intonation on. Even though I'm going to go for more or less the original straight line saddle, it may be slightly askew, or I may make it a little wider to allow for some compensation if it seems necessary.
Okay, Rasta.
On an antique guitar, there's no need to use a winder. You're not in a rush. Take your time. Apply the string exactly where you want it. And enjoy the fruit of your labor when it's exquisite.
Using a piece of spare string to check the intonation, it turns out pretty much a straight line is going to do the trick. This is my bridge slotting jig that I made. Pretty simple. I have different end pieces depending on how long the saddle needs to be. I decided to make this one about 2.5, 3 millimeters deep. It doesn't need to protrude very far over the bridge, so it doesn't need to be that deep into the bridge. Yeah, that's looking more like 2 millimeters. Time to make a saddle out of this bone blank. Oh yeah, satisfying slap on the bottom there. Fits snug, but not too snug. It's great. Now it's down to size. And we're ready to go. Here's a look at the back. Damn, looking pretty friggin' fly, to be honest. The cracks are still visible, but they're not obvious. My workshop looks like this.
Did you make this mess? Buggy, did you make this mess? Just kidding. Love you.
He's a good boy. Let me know if you think I should make a YouTube channel for just Buggy. Can you tell which one of these is the chipped out one? It's not horribly obvious, but on the side you can tell quite easily. There we go. Thanks for joining me on this Italian parlor restoration. It was very satisfying. I hope you learned something. And if not,